So I mentioned keeping documents and records. We're just going to take a moment to go over what CRA requires on documentation in order to support expenses and credits. So first of all, pretty easy. You need the date. You need the vendor name, whether you're the vendor to a client or you're the customer of another vendor. So this is both sides of the coin. The total amount paid or payable. A brief description of the product or service. Now, the tax amount or the indication of the amount or the rate charged, okay? The vendor's GST HST number. So that, of course, is for a sale over $30, but even if you go to, you know, a grocery store and get like a $5 receipt, you'll see that they have their GST HST number right on there as well. And this is a very important point because not everybody knows this part. But in order for CRA to confirm, yes, that money was collected for us and given to us, and therefore you can take that credit, that vendor's GST HST number has to be on the bill, on your invoices that you give your clients. If you're registered for GST HST, your GST HST number has to be on that bill, or business number, just the BN. We'll talk about that a little later. It is very important because here's an example. If you were going to get somebody to put interlock landscaping on your front and it cost you $10,000 and they want an additional $1,300 for HST, you'd want, if they're asking for that, if they've only said this will only cost $10,000, oh, by the way, give me an extra $1,300, I have to give it to CRA, you'd expect that to be the case. But if they're not registered for GST and HST, they're just taking your money. So you want to make sure that their GST HST number is on the bill so that if you're ever reviewed from a business perspective anyway as well, that is a credit that you can, the CRA will allow you to claim. And of course, the last thing is the buyer name. This, of course, is not on smaller bills. It's generally on sales over $150. So, but, you know, you can just use common sense in that case. So let's look at a few examples to see what would be acceptable for CRA as support or documentation and useful to somebody who's trying to enter your transactions. This one here is a pretty standard Canada Post receipt. You can see right at the top of it, it has that, after its name and address, it's got the GST HST number, which is on the list of things that need to be on there. Interesting point though, is you can see there's actually no GST HST charged. When we look at the product or service, we can see that something was being sent to the States. And a technical thing about the GST HST rates is the rate needs to be charged at where the product is taken ownership by the recipient, in this case, the United States. There's a lot of intricacies with GST HST, and I have another video series on that. But for today, all you need to know is never assume. Never assume. You always want to see it. I mean, insurance doesn't have GST HST on it. There's a slew of things. I can get into that later on, but just always see it. Anyway, so yeah, everything that needs to be on here, the date, not who it was sold to, but it's a small amount, so that's acceptable form of documentation. Now, this isn't a receipt. What this is, it's a debit confirmation. It just tells you, yes, Shoppers Drug Mart took $16.82 out of your bank on this day. That's all it says. It doesn't say what was purchased. It doesn't say if there's any tax on it, and that's because it's not a receipt. It's a debit confirmation. All this information I can actually get from your bank statement. This gives us no extra information, and as a result, it is not acceptable form of support or documentation for CRA or even your bookkeeper. As a bookkeeper, I would get this and I wouldn't know what to do with it. Because what did you buy at Shoppers Drug Mart? Well, they sell office supplies, so maybe I'll put it to office supplies and back out the tax. Or I would think, you know what, maybe they just bought Band-Aids. I'm not going to claim this at all. And then you'd miss out on the expense. I'll tell you what this is for. Did you notice that the receipt before it for Canada Post was $16.82 for exactly the same day? That's because that Canada Post happened to be in a Shoppers Drug Mart, so that was the point of sale device that was used to accept my payment. So as you can see, even if I were to assume it was business and back out the tax, I would be wrong. Or even worse, if I wasn't reconciling the bank and I was just adding up all the receipts in an Excel spreadsheet, I might have entered this expense twice. Naomi, you say, it's only $16.82, like it's not a big amount, and I mean that's true. But if you can imagine if this repeats itself and is for bigger invoices or bigger bills, say, then it can become quite a problem. Now, this one's pretty standard. It's got their name and their business number and the date and what was charged, and it doesn't have who it was sold to. And it looks pretty invoicey. But that's okay. It's a small enough amount. It's below the amount that has to have the recipient's name on it. So this is an acceptable form of documentation. So this receipt is written by hand. Not a problem. A lot of receipts are written by hand. The problem is that it doesn't say who the receipt is from. I mean, it has who it's to and it's got an invoice number, but it doesn't help me know who it's from. The other problem with it is it says it's charging tax, but it doesn't say what tax. It needs to say whether it's GST, HST, or it's PST. And the other problem is it also needs to have that number on it. So if it was collecting GST, HST, it would need the business number on it. And if it's collecting PST, it needs the PST number on it. And so without those numbers on it, CRA has no way of confirming that they did indeed get that sales tax. And so as a result, this is not an acceptable form of documentation or support. So this next one looks pretty standard as well. It's got who it's from, who it's to, it's got the date, it's even got the GST, HST number on there this time, but it doesn't break out the GST, HST amount. But it does say that the $500 includes 13% HST. So the fact that it says the rate, because HST is different rates in different places, in different provinces, and the fact that it says it's included in there is acceptable. So this one is an acceptable form of support and documentation for CRA.